In this video, we're going to take a look at Demosthenes' 32nd oration against Zenothemis. It's a really important source for 4th century BCE Athenian banking practices. It also paints a vivid picture of the international trading relationships across the Hellenic world, a commercial dispute held in Athens, bringing in characters from the modern-day Marseilles, Syracuse in Sicily, and Kefalonia in the Ionian Sea. It has a quasi-literary quality. One can read it like a psychological docudrama or a true crime. It's a one-sided courtroom speech, and reading between the lines reveals or hints at all kinds of power plays and manipulative practices and dodgy dealings. It's one of my favourite speeches. And it's also the source for one of the dumbest and most stupidest fraud attempts of all time. Welcome to Ancient Classics. Demosthenes' 32nd oration is usually considered to be an authentic work of Demosthenes himself. It was written for Demosthenes' relative, a guy called Demon, to be delivered by Demon in the courts, and it relates to a dispute over a ship's cargo and relating financing arrangements. The speech centers around contention between Zenothemis and Demon, the speaker. According to Demon, he had extended a loan to a guy called Protos to finance the purchase of grain. Demon's rights to repayment were allegedly secured upon the cargo purchased by Protos, i.e. all other things being equal. If Protos had failed to pay the loan, Demon would have had a right to sell the cargo, assuming he managed to get his hands on it, and use the proceeds to pay off what was owing to him. But Zenothemis claims that he had a superior claim to the grain. But the story proper starts in Syracuse, Sicily, where Protos would have bought the cargo of grain financed by his loan from Demon. There, in Syracuse, a deal is struck between two men from Massalia, modern-day Marseilles. Their names are the aforementioned Zenothemis and Hegestratos, a narration, a ship owner or ship's captain. They borrow money from a syndicate of lenders, also from Marseilles. It appears to be a Bottomry loan, that is, a loan secured on a ship, repayable only if the ship arrives safe to port. The ship sinks, then the lenders don't get repaid and effectively suffer the economic loss of the shipwreck. So the loan functions both as a financing tool, but also as a form of proto-insurance. The purpose of the loan was ostensibly to finance the acquisition of cargo for the voyage, but Demon alleges that Zenothemis and Hegestratos did not purchase any cargo in Syracuse, but instead sent the borrowed money home to Marseilles. So Protos, the guy who borrowed the money from our speaker Demon, loads his cargo on board Hegestratos' ship, and Protos, Zenothemis, and Hegestratos and crew set sail together. Then, 2 to 3 days sail from land, Hegestratos goes down below deck when he thinks nobody's watching and starts drilling a hole in the ship's hull to sink the ship so he doesn't have to repay the loan, having already sent the money home to Marseilles. It's the equivalent of deliberately burning down your property and claiming on the insurance. The only problem is that Hegestratos is out at sea 2 or 3 days from land on a now sinking ship. The crew hear something strange is going on below deck. Maybe Hegestratos was huffing and puffing a lot. They go down and check it out and catch him red-handed trying to sink the ship. Hegestratos flees up to top deck and jumps overboard, but it's dark, so he accidentally misses his escape dinghy. Clearly, he really hadn't thought this through, and then he drowns to death. Zenothemis, Hegestratos' alleged partner in crime, is left on board and claims complete ignorance of the scheme. Let's pause for a moment. If Demon's account can be believed, what would have been the point of that little escapade? If Hegestratos had succeeded in sinking the ship, and assuming that he and Zenothemis had made it safely to dry land, well, then what next? True, Hegestratos and Zenothemis had borrowed money, now safe on its way to Marseilles, and by sinking the ship, they would no longer have been liable to repay the loan, but meanwhile, Hegestratos would have still lost his ship. Well, perhaps the ship was nearing the end of its life or due an expensive refurb. That's the only way to make sense of it to me. Or perhaps it wasn't even Hegestratos' ship. He's called the narration, which is usually translated as ship owner, but it doesn't necessarily mean that. It could just mean some kind of ship's captain without ownership of the ship. But if that were the case, then how would they have got away with securing the loan on the ship unless they played a double fraud and misrepped the ownership? Those are the days predating internationally searchable ship registers, so they might have got away with it. But I have other questions too, like why would Hegestratos and Zenothemis have attempted such a dangerous scheme? We're told that they're 2 or 3 days away from land, so it sounds barely credible that Hegestratos would have attempted to wreck the ship while at sea. True, Demon says that they were 2 or 3 days away from land, but he might just have meant 2 or 3 days sail from Syracuse rather than from land per se, and they may have been close to shore at the time. But even so, the fact that Hegestratos ended up drowning anyway shows that the hazards of scuppering a ship at sea are no laughing matter. But either which way, something doesn't quite add up here. Perhaps it's almost as if Demon was hiding something, or not telling the whole story. With Hegestratos dead and the ship leaky but not quite sunk yet, Zenothemis tries to encourage the crew to abandon ship, but they refuse. Instead, they patch her up and sail on to Kephallonia. There at Kephallonia, Zenothemis tries to get the crew to sail back to Marseilles, but the local officials force them to sail to Athens instead. So, Zenothemis, the ship and crew arrive at Athens. As soon as they do, the ship and its cargo is taken into custody, prevented from offloading and sailing away again, as various creditors start to squabble over the ship and its cargo. Zenothemis now makes a new claim that he had loaned money to Hegestratos, secured on the cargo of the ship. Demon claims that Zenothemis was encouraged to make this fraudulent claim on the cargo by some dodgy member of the Athenian criminal underground, a chap called Aristophon, whom Demon himself had hired supposedly to keep an eye out on the cargo, a kind of security agent, albeit a allegedly dodgy and corrupt one. Zenothemis' claim was apparently also supported by his creditors, and Demon alleges that they did so because they had no other choice. Their only hope of getting some kind of payment out of Zenothemis was to ensure that he was able to enforce his security over the cargo for his own benefit, giving him at least something to pay his creditors. So a almighty dispute arises between various parties, as Demon recounts. Did Zenothemis really lend money to Hegestratos? Now, some claim that the two entered into an agreement with someone on board ship while sailing from Syracuse. Perhaps this was some kind of back-to-back loan whose repayment was not dependent on the ship's safe arrival at port, but the details are very unclear from the text. Protos, the guy to whom Demon, the speaker, had made a loan, tries to enforce his rights over the cargo along with his business partner Phertatos. Zenothemis refuses to let go of the cargo, which seems to be under his control or possession. Protos suggests that the matter should be put to the tax authorities back in Syracuse, because they would have the relevant export duties registers to prove, supposedly, that Protos had indeed bought the grain, not Zenothemis or Hegestratos. But Zenothemis refuses to return to Syracuse. And then the plot thickens, as they say. As we've noted, Protos, the legitimate purchaser of the ship's cargo of grain, had borrowed money from the speaker Demon, secured on the cargo. Had everything gone smoothly, Protos would have sold the grain at Athens, paid off Demon, and then had sufficient sale proceeds left over to make a profit. But, according to Demon, the market value of grain in Athens had tanked. So, if Protos had sold the grain at market prices, he would have been unable to repay his creditors in full, let alone have any proceeds to keep to himself. So, Protos then sides with Zenothemis, conceding some dispute that he had with him. The details of that dispute, that accusation, are sketchy here, perhaps intentionally so, but it has something to do with an accusation that Protos got drunk on board and did something negligent or crazy. Some speculate that Zenothemis' accusation was that Protos had been safekeeping the documents that proved Zenothemis' right to the cargo, and that Protos had got drunk and destroyed, stole, or lost the documents. So by admitting to that accusation, Protos would have effectively have been supporting Zenothemis' claim to the cargo. But I don't know. It's all very sketchy in its detail, and it all seems very shady. The manuscript breaks off soon thereafter, so we don't get to see how Demon's argument concludes and what else he alleged or denied, and sure enough, we don't know what the outcome of this piece of litigation was. Leaving aside its incompleteness, Demosthenes 32 is a litigation speech written for Demon by his relative Demosthenes, who'd already achieved some fame by this point. It's just one side of the story, one with the explicit intention of arguing for Demon's side of the case. Some of the details are sketchy and unclear, as I've noted. Now, were it written by a lesser writer, one might put those deficiencies down to the writer writer's lack of clarity or precision. But this is a speech by Demosthenes, one of the very best. One can take it for granted that Demosthenes would have done all he could to make the account seem compelling and watertight, and he would have done a better job than most people could. So the fact that there are glaring holes that not even Demosthenes could gloss over is telling. Indeed, some commentators take an exceedingly cynical view on Damon's side of the story. Edward Cohen claims that most scholars are of the view that the cargo did indeed belong to Hegestratos and possibly Zenothemis too, who might have been in the right. And Cohen views Damon as a master tactician. Notwithstanding the disagreements and disputes that seem to have occurred at every leg of the journey and on board the ship itself, Damon still has managed to ensure that the cargo is seized and the matter litigated, not by him, in Athens. There's no indication that Damon was present anywhere but Athens, but he seems to have had his agents working for him at various stages, even if he now seeks to distance himself from them. Now, there's certainly a lot to unpick, and a lot to speculate about what's presented to us in the speech. Even without thinking about it too deeply, I find this a rich and engaging source with its slapstick elements, an air of intrigue, hints of a murky commercial underworld, its international or pan-Hellenic outlook, and reflections on things like the impact of changes in commodity prices, reference to export duties, and the administrative infrastructure supporting these things. Not to mention all the dramatic and legal details of creditors fighting it out for priority over collateral. All in all, it gives a panoramic view of international trade and finance in the 4th century. There is so much here if you choose to look into it. Meanwhile, like and subscribe, ring the notification bell, and we'll be back soon.
In Athens courts where shadows weave, a tale of gold and grand deceit. Demon speaks, his voice aflame, against the Protos in Athena's name. From Syracuse the sails arise, a ship of lies beneath the skies. Hegestratos with cunning bold, secures and alone on dreams of gold. Bottomry, the land is vow, the halls they're bond by where I bow. The cargo's lost, the schemes of life, sticking dreams in starless night. Step the sea through the Athenian sea, maritime schemes in the court of decree. Written bold in a treacherous play, Athenian justice will seize the day. In Syracuse the plot was laid, Protos brain a debt repaid. But Zenothemis with Massalia's guide, they coin away to a distant isle. Hegestratos below the deck drills the hull to doom the wreck. Caught by crew, he flees, he falls, drawn by fate in Neptune's falls.
The lenders bow, the hulls have gone, but where art thou? The cargo's lost, the schemes of blight, sinking dreams in starless night. Sails of the city through the Ocean Sea, maritime schemes in the courts of decree. Great and cold in a treacherous play, Athenian justice will seize that day. The Massalia, the ship limps on, Zenothemis schemes though his partners run. In Athens port he claims the grain, but Damon's words will break his chain. Justice will seize the day. What Demosthenes with words of fire expose the fraud, live through the fire. In Athens halls where justice reigns, the sin of the siege shall burn in chains.